Wokingham out of a desire to serve our whole community. So that's why we've organised this tonight. As I'm sure you will know, there are 5 candidates standing for election in our constituency, and the planning team for this event have not only invited them all to attend, they have encouraged them all to attend and be with us tonight. Just to be clear, the planning team have been in touch with the Electoral Commission, and the Electoral Commission is satisfied that this fulfils all the criteria for a non-selected hustings. So our 5 candidates in our constituency are Ms Kizzy Johansson for the Green Party, Ms Annabel Mullen for Advance Together, Sir John Redwood for the Conservative Party, Dr Phillip Lee for the Lib Democrats, and Dr Annette Medhurst for the Labour Party. It would be great, it's so good to see you here tonight. It would be great if you could just give me a show of hands to say if you are a voter in this constituency. I am? Great, jolly good. That's wonderful to know. We're very pleased to welcome Dr Phillip Lee and Dr Annette Medhurst this evening. Let's welcome the Lees and friends. Now, before we begin, I want to outline how things are going to run this evening. So the first thing we're going to do is each candidate is going to introduce themselves and their party. We had a toss of a coin out there, and Annette won the toss, so she's going first. So they'll have 4 minutes each just to say a little bit about themselves. Then you've been providing questions wonderfully. I saw the stack of questions, that's absolutely amazing. Questions from the audience will be asked in the next section. They've been submitted in advance. And how it will work is the person who asks the question will get to read their question out. Each candidate will respond. There'll be an opportunity for brief response and then an opportunity for brief response for that. Just go with it. I've got it written down. And if I get it wrong, someone's going to put me right. But that's the idea. And then we will finish off the evening with, again, brief closing statements from each candidate, and we aim to finish by 9 p.m. So I'd like to remind everyone now that we are here to listen to each other carefully so that we can all gain a deeper understanding of the issues, and more specifically, how each candidate would represent our constituency. It does go without saying that we need to do all this with respect. Yes, we do indeed have different views about things, and some of us will even feel quite passionately about some of those things. And let's just be clear, disagreeing is not the issue this evening. It is the manner in which we disagree that is crucial. Listening and respect are essential to our community life and to our democratic process, and that's what we're here to do tonight. And so I also just want to, I've said this to our friends here tonight, just to ask everyone to stick to the issues and remember that we are all human beings, real people with feelings, ideals, hopes, gifts, skills and experience. And that's really important tonight. Now, I am a follower of Jesus, and we are in this building being welcomed by this particular church community. And so I'd like to begin with prayer, if I may. Loving God, we thank you for those men and women who serve our communities in local and national government. Thank you for their hard work, their vision, their care, and the way they often have to hold in tension conflicting realities. Tonight we thank you for our 5 candidates and their willingness to serve. Will you encourage them, bless them and protect them during this election process? We pray to you for our constituency. We are thankful for the great many blessings that we share, and yet we lament the challenges and struggles that also exist. As we have the opportunity now to think about what is important for our communities, give us great love, wisdom and insight as we participate in choosing and shaping the future. Help us, Lord, to not simply think about what is best for us and those like us, but also to think about the needs of others. Lord, we know that your heart longs for a community where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and flourish, and we long for that too. Loving God, please show us and our whole community how we can each be part of making this vision a reality. Amen. Right, let's get started. So, as I said, we're starting with the opening speeches, and Annette is going to start. So thank you, Annette. Please do give us your opening speech.
I'm Annette Medhurst. I am the Labour Party's parliamentary candidate for Wokingham constituency. Firstly, I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight on this cold, dark December evening, and I'd like to thank Churches Together for organising this event. I imagine it's a very busy time for lots of you, as it is for myself, even taking away the general election and a broken ankle, so I appreciate you all making the efforts to make this event happen. I live in Roos Hill with my young family, so walking distance from here. My children go to local schools, one of which I'm governor at, and I'm also a trustee at a local early years education setting. My background is in medical research, specifically oncology, and just to clear up any confusion, I have the title doctor because I have a PhD, not because I'm a clinician, and I have had a couple of residents get in touch with me and complain that I'm standing for Parliament rather than seeing patients at a time when the NHS is undisputably under significant strain. Equality underpins everything I believe in, and inequality in this country is getting worse and worse. Equality and fairness surely are the essential ingredients or the building blocks of a successful society. And after years and years of austerity, we are in a situation where far too many people are struggling to make ends meet. Far too many of our public services are stretched to breaking. Locally, we have an amazing collection of anti-poverty charities. We have the Food Bank, Salvation Army, First Days and Cowshed, and while I applaud their efforts in our community, they do a fantastic job, and frankly, I don't know what we do without them at the moment. I'd like to see the day where they can shut up shop, because we don't have people living in poverty on our doorstep. I want our education system to be properly funded. I want it to allow everyone to have an equal opportunity to be the best that they can and reach their full potential. And I want children with special educational needs to be fully supported so that they too can succeed at school and be aspirational with their futures. The NHS and social care system is crumbling, and we see an ever-increasing number of healthcare professionals speaking out on a daily basis about the struggles that they face all the time. In Wokingham, we struggle to get GP appointments. When I broke my ankle recently, the staff at the urgent care centre said to me how our inability to see a GP in our local community puts incredible strain on their already stretched services. I see so many people from Wokingham that really need the help and support of a Labour government. And then there's the climate change. That's the one that keeps me awake at night. I worry about what the future holds for my children. We as a family unit do what we can, but as a country we need to do more, so much more, and we need to do it now. I want to see a society that is fair and just for everyone, and I hope this evening I can convince you that a Labour government is best placed to do just that, and I, as their candidate, truly care about representing everyone in the community that I live in. It's time for real change in Wokingham, and I believe that I am best placed to offer that change. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you, Chair, and can I second everything you've said about the importance of civility, the coarsening of public discourse in recent years should worry us all. So I second everything you've said on that. Thank you to you all for coming this evening. It's not great weather, so many people turning up to take part in the democratic process. You ought to be congratulated. It's a pity we don't have every candidate here, but two of us have bothered to turn up, and I hope that we can have a proper debate about all of the issues, some of which Annette has already mentioned. But let's be honest, we're here having this general election for the first time in December for the best part of 90 years because of one issue. It's the issue that comes up on the 11,000 doors that we've knocked on as a campaign team the last 2 weeks quite often, and it's Brexit. And personally, I'm fed up with it, so I don't know how you're feeling about it, but even though I'm tired of it, I recognise that it's the most significant event in British politics in a generation. And as I'm sure most of you know in the room, I changed parties because of it. I've had the privilege of representing part of Wokingham Borough for the best part of a decade as the Member of Parliament for Bracknell. I'm well aware of the pressures, planning, healthcare, funding challenges for education, particularly in this borough that has always had a history of underfunding relative to the rest of the country. My postbag has been full of these problems over many, many years. But I stand in front of you as a Liberal Democrat candidate this evening, proud to do so, primarily because of the issue of Brexit, but not exclusively so. This election is about Brexit. If the Conservatives get a majority next week, we're leaving soon thereafter. We have no trade deals in place. Don't believe the hype if you're even tempted to believe them. This is serious. So this constituency has a part to play in trying to choose somebody who can stop it. You currently have the pleasure of having a no-deal Brexiteer, climate change denier, representing you at Westminster. I think it's time you didn't. Now, moving to the other issues, of course I'm passionate about the health service. I've continued to work in it proudly throughout my time as an MP and indeed as a minister. Some of you might see me pop up at GP behind closed doors at 3 o'clock in the morning if you're tuning into Channel 5. And you will see that I've worked in a challenging community, primarily in Slough, with all of the issues that Annette has so eloquently explained and mentioned. It is that experience, and the experience I've garnered as a Member of Parliament over the last 10 years, that shapes my politics and helped shape me make a decision in September that wasn't easy. Crossing the floor was not easy. I'd been an activist for a party for 27 years. But my party then had left me. It was no longer a Conservative and Unionist party. Next week, the Brexit Party may win. And I don't think that's in the interest of this constituency, or indeed our country. That's why I stand before you as a Liberal Democrat, because I want to try and stop it from happening. I'm proud to do so, and I hope I can get all of your support in the pursuit of that goal. Thank you very much.
So, the questions have been submitted in advance. The first question is from Mark Passenger, and he's standing there at the back. Would you like to read your question out, please? Oh, is the hand held to? Yep.
The issue of the UK leaving the EU has revealed divisions in this country. What do you think are the main areas of division, and what should be done to heal such divisions?
Thank you for the question, Mark. It's actually quite noticeable when you knock on doors and you talk to families how often you encounter division within families. Young people saying one thing, older people saying another. And indeed, if you speak to people across the country, there are regional differences on this. I personally wish the referendum hadn't taken place. I actually said it at an event in this constituency in February 2016, because I worried that it was going to cause the division that you allude to. Now, what can we do about it? First of all, I resigned as a minister and indeed crossed the floor and have actively campaigned to go back to the people with the final say on a Brexit deal. And I continue to believe that that is the way to work through to get to a point where this country is brought back together. The regions, the constituent parts of the home union, families, communities, businesses. The causes of Brexit are much more complex. And yes, people do feel left out of how things have become in this country. There is an overwhelming, I think, case for the reform of capitalism. People don't feel like they have a chance in life how they once did. And so for me, it isn't just addressing Brexit itself, however important that is, but the causes of Brexit, the fear of change, the fear of isolation, the fear that you don't have a chance to be successful in life, all of those things, and that's education, that's business taxation vis-a-vis massive companies avoiding tax because they're international. All of those things have to be addressed if you're going to address the divisions that you quite rightly refer to.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think I'm going to frustrate this gentleman over here actually, because I agree with a lot of what Phillip Lee
say how we would address the divisions.
Okay, so with regards to addressing the divisions in the country, yeah, I'm a strong Remainer, and I wish we hadn't had that referendum in the first place. But with regards to looking at why that result happened, I agree. I think that there are lots of parts of the country where there is an anger, there is people don't see a way out maybe of the lives that they're in and the situations that they find themselves in. And we've had years and years of austerity, you know, people have been broken down from that. And I think being able to address some of those issues in some of these communities that feel left behind can go some way to hopefully answer some of those questions. But moving forward with regards to how we deal with Brexit, I do think that we need to have a people's vote. I think that we need to, you know, it's been going on for what, three and a half years now? And it's been bubbling away that unfortunately there has been no resolution. And I think that having a people's vote is the best way to deal with it and solve it and answer it once and for all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Did you want to come back on that part? Okay, there we go. Right, so that means we can go on to the second question. The second question is from Margaret Cox. Where are you? There we go.
Why have we heard so little about the urgent problem of climate change during this election? I would say particularly from the Conservatives, but what action would you take in government to address this?
Okay, so this is the problem of climate change and what action that you would take in government to address this. Annette, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you for your question. Yeah, you're quite right. I think there is an impetus with most of the major political parties now to try and address climate change. But yeah, we're lagging behind, and you're right, we need to do something, and we need to do something now. I think the Labour Party has set out quite a clear set of guidelines. They want to basically have essentially a green industrial revolution. That we need to tackle climate from all angles. We do what we can at home, but it needs to be bigger than that. We need to have bigger policies. We need to make radical steps, and we need to have the courage to carry it through really, and not water things down when it looks like maybe certain ideals or certain deadlines don't be met. We do need to look at energy. Most of the carbon emissions, I think it's around 56%, come from buildings. So I think the Labour Party's proposals of trying to insulating, I think it's 27 million homes across the country, that's a really good one. You know, it is important that we take these big steps. I think things like the transport network, electrifying buses, trying to invest in cycleways and walkways for people. We need basically quite a change of our way of life, basically. And you need a party who is prepared to say, we are going to invest in this area, we are going to invest in green technologies, we're going to invest in green jobs in order to try and meet our being able to cut carbon emissions by 2030, which is what experts have told us we need to be able to do to keep global warming under check. And it's something that I feel very strongly about, and you're right, it's something that I don't think has been talked about enough to date. And I really hope that while this election is, a lot of people talk about Brexit, it really needs to be the election about the climate emergency as well.
Thank you.
You're right. You would think something as important and significant as climate change, global warming, would have been at the forefront of this campaign. Unfortunately, some members of my former party, including the incumbent here, there seems to be a relationship between climate change denial and sort of support for Brexit. And I suspect that plays a part in why you don't hear them talking about it so much. They don't actually believe that it's happening. There's probably quite a lot of agreement here in terms of what we need to do, but let me concentrate on one particular area, which is insulation. The insulation of homes, not only would that be good for the environment in terms of reducing CO2, it also happens to be good for the economy because you're just not using the energy itself and paying for it, and that energy is now increasingly coming from abroad, from countries that we really perhaps don't want to have such economic links with. And finally, it actually is a good policy because people who can't afford to meet their fuel bills or struggle to do so can do if they've got properly insulated homes. So for me, it has always been the case that the lowest hanging fruit is being insulation. The Liberal Democrats want to concentrate on low-income families up until 2025, but our actual target is to properly insulate all offices, homes, the lot, because it's the obvious right thing to do, both for the environment and indeed for Britain's role in the world, and position in the world, and its influence in the world, as well as addressing the obvious challenge of climate change.
Thank you. Margaret, did you would like to come back on any of that?
Yes, I would also like to hear parties talking about the fact that there will be, people do have to change their lifestyle. It's not going to be easy, but we need leadership to actually make some positive changes.
I wholeheartedly agree. It is a big thing, and we need, you're completely right, leadership from the top, and it needs to be big changes in our entire society to be able to address climate change. Absolutely, I completely agree with you.
Yes, I think there is a huge challenge with regards to the way in which we lead our lives, not just in this country, but actually across the Western world. Our consumption patterns are actually fed by cheap labour and production in China, in great part. And China itself is producing the CO2 emissions hand over fist to feed our lifestyles. The challenge for all political parties is to take people on a journey from where they are to where they need to be to save this planet, and for it to be delivered in a democracy. And it is something which is extremely difficult to marry the two. I'm being straightforward and candid with you. Now, we've set a target of 2045 as opposed to 2050 on zero carbon. Now, some might say that's not enough, and that's often what I get from people who are passionate about this issue. But the challenge that I face, and indeed other people who go into legislative face, is that we also want to have the support of the people in the process, and that's why we need to do it in tandem with them and educate and try to inspire and to lead.
Thank you very much. There we go, that's great. Thank you. We are really privileged to have a number of young people with us tonight. It's great to see you here, and we hope that you're finding this interesting. Let's have a participation. Right. Question 3 is from Peter Humphreys. Right, just need to wait. It's a bit less like a competition, isn't it? See whether you win or not. That's right.
Getting on the housing land, it was a big issue for young people. Yet last Thursday week, Wokingham Borough Council announced that no affordable units will be included in their flagship Carnival Pool development, as was also the case at Elmsfield. Private developers are normally denied planning permission in this borough on major schemes unless they provide 40% affordable housing. If elected, what would you do to ensure councils meet their social responsibilities?
Well, Peter, development as an issue as a whole is a really challenging issue in places like Wokingham. And we can all see as we go round how many houses have been built. I was born in the Thames Valley, about 10 miles from here, and in my, I like to think, relatively short but lifetime, how many tens of thousands of homes have been built, business parks and industrial parks. But when you're building those homes in particular, it's important that those homes are also affordable, that there's a certain proportion of social housing. And I know, speaking to Liberal Democrat colleagues on Wokingham Borough Council, that this is a strong desire to address this problem. And it certainly is Liberal Democrat policy to increase the proportion of social housing in these developments. But it isn't just about the affordability, it's also about the living environment, it's also about access to education services. And one part of my local plan for Wokingham is around access to healthcare services. Because at the moment as it currently stands, planning permission is granted with no regard to the provision of primary and secondary care. And this has to change. So if you elect me as your Member of Parliament, I will seek to change that nationally in legislation. That if you grant houses, you have to have an arrangement with the local commissioning group that they are going to provide additional general practice and primary care services in that area. Because all I hear on the doorsteps is for the people who are living in the area, their difficulties in getting general practice appointments were already there, and then you plant another 1,000 homes in the area and it gets worse. Healthcare must play a part in planning, and it's something I'm quite passionate about.
Use some of your seconds for applause, that's great. Annette?
Yes, housing and development. It's a really big one here. It comes up at the council, in the chamber, it's in the local press, there are petitions. I get quite twitchy when I hear the term affordable housing, to be honest, because I think affordable for who? And I would like to see much better definition in that as a term. And yes, it is a problem for young people getting a foot on the property ladder and being able to sort of stay in the area where they grew up. I think we need the right type of housing in the right places. I think I would like the Labour Party wants to see more social housing, more council houses to be built, but they do need to be put in the right areas. They need to be put in places where that infrastructure is in place with regards to things like health, but also transport and a community. When I've been canvassing in some parts of the borough, I spoke to people, to a woman in one development, and it was an area I wasn't that familiar with, and I said, where do you go for a pint of milk? There's nothing here. And so there needs to be that infrastructure in place. It needs to be part of sort of planning legislation, that you think of the bigger picture rather than just plonking down a lot of homes. And something that Wokingham is in the southeast. There's a lot, it is an affluent area. But I do question how many more two-bedroom executive flats for £400,000 we really need in this area. I'd like to see much more.
Is there anything you'd like clarified or anything else?
No, I've heard the Conservative view, obviously, because it's them that's implementing their own policy. We can't have that, so thank you to the two candidates.
As we said earlier, everyone was invited and encouraged to come. Thank you. That was a really good question. That's excellent. Good. Right. Cracking on then. Number 4. Who's the lucky 4th question? Oh, you are. Your name is not it. Tell us your name.
I'm Erin. I'm a member, student at the Hull. So I would like to know, what would you say to the 52% of voters who voted to leave the EU and why we haven't done so yet?
Thank you, Erin, for your question. That's a very good question. I would say that I would question whether or not there is a strong enough will to get it done. I mean, we've had 3.5 years to try and negotiate a deal, to try and push it through Parliament, and it just hasn't happened. There's been a lot of talk surrounding what will happen if we leave the EU without a deal, but yeah, we're still not at that point. And I think when we've had this, it's a really important issue, but I do feel that Brexit, it's almost been like this constant babbling distraction in the background. So a lot of other things that are going on across the country. So I would say to them, I think we need to have an opportunity to have another vote and see what happens as a result of that. Whereas where on the ballot there is the option to remain or to leave with a certain type of deal. And I hope that taking that forward, that would allow us to have a final binding vote, basically.
We are. Well, this is good, because the pithier you are, the more questions we get, so that's good. Okay, pithy, please.
Thank you for the question, Erin. Where do I start? I've lived and breathed Brexit and the ups and downs in Parliament in the last 18 months or so. A simple answer to your question is that people in Parliament who believe in Brexit could never agree on what it was. Okay, so you have a situation, for example, where the Prime Minister votes twice against a deal, then votes for it. He then rustles up his own deal, which was the one that Theresa May turned down, that was originally offered from Brussels, and calls it a brand spanking new deal. Nigel Farage then trashes the deal and then decides he's going to support the party that's going to be introducing it. All of that is true, okay? So therefore, are we surprised that we couldn't get agreement in the House of Commons on Brexit? I'm not, because I think the House of Commons was actually reflecting the confusion in the wider public, and that's why we've ended up having a general election. My own personal view is you don't deal with a single issue on a general election, but we are where we are. And so, if I was to wind back the clock, in 1975, there may be some people in there who look very young and vital, so maybe not, but the referendum took place after the negotiation. So people knew what they were voting for and what they were going to get. And here I put up my hand up and said, guilty as charged. I voted through a referendum that was going to take place before the negotiation had taken place. So therefore, people got to vote for something and all the other claims associated with it without actually having been negotiated. And if I could turn back the clock, I wish we hadn't done it that way round.
Did you want to come back on that?
I obviously think it's fair enough what you've both said, and obviously you both advocate that you want another people's vote, but say the same result was to come, do you believe that these issues within Parliament would then be resolved and then it would be simple and we would leave, or?
My own view is if it's a legally and practically deliverable Brexit and it's on the ballot paper and the British public vote for it, then that's a much better place to be than delivering a Brexit that doesn't match the promises that were made in 2016. As a doctor, I want informed consent before I proceed with an operation, which you can choose to have the operation, but you have to be availed of the risks and benefits before you proceed. And you do one thing, you sign a consent form. It's a two-stage process to have an operation in this country. How come it's not a two-stage process to do Brexit?
Voting for. But I'm loath to ever say that because while I think there was a lot of misinformation on both sides, probably, to be honest, but I do think that if we have a second vote with, like as I said, Remain and some sort of Brexit deal, it will be binding, and that will be what happens, and moving forward, and people will have a much better perspective on with regards to what they actually voted for.
Thank you. Dave McCon, it's your moment of glory. Here comes the microphone. Would you like to ask your question, please?
John Redwood has won over 50% of the votes in the last few elections. Given that neither of you have a real chance of winning the seat fighting against each other, why won't you get together, forego your tribal party differences, support a tactical vote, and get behind a single, progressive, pro-Remain candidate?
We can't even agree who goes first here. It is frustrating, and I recognise and acknowledge your frustration. I also recognise that the Labour Party is a national party and they want to stand their candidates everywhere, and I had conversations about this actually months ago about was there any way through to getting some sort of Remain Alliance candidate set up. It didn't happen in the way that it perhaps should have done, and that's why we may very well no deal Brexit next year off the back of a 38% vote for the Conservatives getting a majority. Just mull over that. Yeah, that's what might happen. All I can say is that, you know, my team, we work extremely hard, and we think that actually, contrary to what you've just said, is a lot closer than you might expect. That actually the people of Wokingham constituency recognise, one, that they don't like Brexit, and two, that there's a time for a change around here after 32 years of the same person. Everybody has the right to choose who they vote for, and I respect that, and I wouldn't want it any other way. But everybody in this room, if you want that change, and you want to see a stop to Brexit, or at least get it back to the country for lots of different reasons, please do think about your vote and ask around and find out where you think it is best placed. Because if you don't, it may end up being that this constituency contributes towards this no-deal Brexiting next year.
It's a tall order for anyone to unseat John Redwood. I think most of us would agree. He has a very big majority. With regards to parties getting together for a Remain alliance, who am I or any of us to tell people in this constituency how they should vote? We're knocking on doorsteps too, and there's a lot of movement, but I don't hear a lot of people saying, I'm going to tactically vote in this direction just for Brexit. And the concept of tactical voting doesn't really sit very well with me. I think it's almost like major political parties are kind of playing with the electorate to a degree in order to try and push them voting in one direction or another.
The system isn't fair.
But that's a different question. That is a question on electoral reform. With regards to how you vote in this constituency, I would say look at the polls, maybe from the last general election. See, look what happened then. There are all sorts of things that you can look at. And yes, talk to people in your communities. But I would say that my experience on the doorstep is that no, it may not be a done deal. But I don't necessarily think that all of the votes are necessarily going in one direction to the Liberal Democrats.
Can I? Yes.
So just following up on that gentleman's point then, given that the electoral system is as it is, would you support changes in the electoral system to say include PR?
I think that's a separate question, so I'm not going to you have to say, well, you're even too late to write it down and shove it through. So
That's why we tactical vote. That's why.
We have, thank you. We have had the options put before us that whether we stick with our principles or we vote tactically, and I'm sure you're all reflective enough to decide what is best to do. Thank you. So we've got no comeback. Right, now it's even that's thrown me. Right, number 6 is, I think it's Ryan Murphy. Oh, it's you. Yes. Okay.
Good evening. 1 in 5 young people suffer from a mental illness, and that's about 20% of our population. Yet only 4% of our total healthcare budget is spent on mental health. What are your views on how best to tackle this mental health crisis?
Thank you for your question, Ryan. Yes, certainly. Mental health has had years and years of underfunding. The Labour Party is pledging to ring-fence 1.6 billion for mental health, and they very much have a passion and a desire to make mental health funding and things like that really on a par with physical health. And it's something that I very much feel is very important as well. They're very much like hidden things that still, even now, aren't really talked about quite so much in society, which is incredibly sad because they're still illnesses. So the Labour Party very much wants to invest significantly and ring-fence that money for mental health.
Thank you for the question, Ryan. Such an important issue. Why are we seeing more mental illness in society? That's a topic I could talk all night about. and some of it's to do with social media, some of it's to do with atomisation of society and breakdowns of families and retreat of faith, and it's a complex issue. But undoubtedly the demand for mental illness, for mental health care is going up. What do you do about it? The Liberal Democratic position is to commit significant finance to this. I was at a mental health charity on behalf of the party only on Monday in Wood Green in London. We're committing £11 billion to it over the next 5 years. The challenge, indeed, for all parties is that for a long time, psychiatry and mental health services have been a Cinderella speciality in funding. You always get money for paediatrics, you always get money for delivery suites, casualty departments. And mental illness was always because there was a stigma attached to it, it was forgotten. So under both Conservative and Labour governments, in the time I've been a doctor, the last 20 years, it's always been difficult to find the right care. And it's got to change. Because as you rightly point out, many people in this room will be suffering, and certainly people in their families will be suffering from a mental illness. And it's about time we have parity between physical illness and mental illness, because that's the type of society I think we should all want to be a part of.
Thank you for your question. Right, okay. 7, Richard Cox. Would you like to ask a question, please?
Are the candidates happy that ever more extravagant spending promises are being made to us, and can they be delivered by their party if their party comes to power?
It was interesting to note, actually, thank you Richard for that question, it was interesting to note the Institute for Physical Studies assessed Liberal Democrat, Conservative and Labour manifestos, and actually was more positive about the realism in the Liberal Democrat manifesto on finances than the other two. Actually, the other two so-called major parties are being remarkably profligate, and we have tried to remain within, trying to reduce the total national debt still as a proportion in a way that the others aren't. And personally, I want to pass on a legacy to my children and my grandchildren to be proud of, or passing on increasing debt doesn't work with me. You can invest in infrastructure, you can borrow when money is cheap to invest in infrastructure, and you can make a justifiable argument because it would then strengthen the economy and the society going forward. But fundamentally, we have a responsibility to our children and grandchildren to always have an eye on living within our means as a country. Because not only do I not want to pass on a planet that is deteriorating, I don't want to pass on debt to my children's generation and grandchildren's generation. And if you look at the figures and the proportion of GDP on debt, the last 10 years, despite all of the difficult decisions, we still have a lot of debt to deal with. 2 trillion. It's a huge figure. A figure so large people can't even conceive of it. So I'm actually proud to be standing on a manifesto that still, it's got a social conscience, it wants to do the right thing by people, it wants to construct the priorities, healthcare, education, climate change, etc. But it also recognises that you need to be responsible with people, with public money. And that's why I'm proud to be a Liberal Democrat.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I did wonder if a question might come up about finances and how it would be worded so that it would be suitable for whoever came on the line. I think we have gone through this very prolonged period where we just haven't spent any money, this period of austerity. Even the UN is calling it, self-inflicted poverty, basically. And when I hear people talking about, not wanting to spend money and not wanting to invest, I sort of come back at them and say, well, what about what's going to happen if we don't invest, especially in the situation that we're in at the moment. Yes, the Labour Party's proposals are very bold, and they do want to spend a lot of money. But I'm okay with that. I think we do need to spend money, and they have got a thought-out plan where they talk about where they're going to raise the revenue from taxation. But we are in a position where we really do have to invest. There's a lot of services that are completely crumbling around us, and so I think it's really important that we're at that point now that we do it. So I think we can't really make any mistake about the situation that the country's in. And I think that the Labour Party, they are held to very high account when it comes to things like spending. And they go to great efforts to not just generate that manifesto and say what they're going to spend, but also talk about where they're going to find the money in order to do the things that they want to do.
Did you want to come back on that for clarification?
I would just say that certainly investment is something that we need, but I for one don't feel that the government should. I don't need the government to give me free broadband, and that just seems a waste of money.
No, it's not. We subsidise the minimum.
Excuse me, would you like to respond to that?
I think you make a fair point. You have to decide. You have a finite budget. You have a finite capacity to be able to borrow as a government. And money is actually relatively cheap at the moment for governments, in historic terms. But when you invest that money, it's got to be it's got to be a good investment. And I'm not so sure, looking at some of Labour's plans, that I can see that they're the right investments to be making. Personally, I think if you look at the infrastructure of healthcare, if it was up to me, over 80% of NHS expenditure is on chronic illness. I would be investing in community hospitals, because that's where chronic healthcare should be managed. You shouldn't be having to drive to an overfull car park at Royal Parks. You should be having your outpatient appointments here in Wokingham. And you could actually build a network of community hospitals across the country. And I think that would be a solid investment of public money, because you give better healthcare, better facilities, people have more time to go to the hospital and then get on with caring for their elderly and caring for their children and all the other complexities of modern life. So for me, you're right to invest, but you have to have a really, really solid case in what. And like you, I've got some question marks over the Labour Party manifesto in that regard.
Thank you. Annette? I'll just pick up that one point you mentioned about broadband. If you said that was going to be a policy to me 3 or 4 years ago, I'd have said, that's great, really? Does that need to be rolled out? But actually, now I feel about it differently, because I think that, it's important for people to be connected. You've got children at school who can't do their homework because they don't have access to broadband at home. That's singling them out. And I know schools say, oh, but they can come to an after-school club. But that's still making them different. And I think being able to roll out something like broadband actually is a great leveller in society. And I've kind of come full circle on this, and I actually think it's a really good policy. And I think it would be a good thing for promoting equality in our society.
Sounds good, and it sounds like Richard and David need to have a conversation after the broadband. Thank you, because that would be really good to listen to each other about that. That's great, thank you. Right, question 8 is from Sue Cooper. Sue, where are you? Oh, right, there we go. I have in my hand the last questions now. This is all theirs. But we'll keep going.
What will you do to ease poverty both in Wokingham and also in the poorer countries of the world?
Thank you so much for the question. Poverty. Living in Wokingham, there seems to be this misconception that poverty doesn't really exist here, and that's just not true. I think it's, 1 in 6 children in the Wokingham area living in poverty now, and that's just heartbreaking. And it shouldn't be like that. It's 2019. We really shouldn't be living in a country where we have those sorts of figures. With regards to how to deal with poverty locally, I think we need to raise household incomes. We have an incredible amount of in-work poverty now, something that's just, that's going up and up. I think Labour Party's pledges to next year to bring the minimum wage up to the living wage to £10 an hour will take steps in that direction. I think changing some of the benefit system, getting rid of universal credit, removing the two-child cap, things like that will also help. But I think it needs to be sort of more comprehensive than that as well. Things like Sure Start centres, being able to provide families that are in poverty with sort of those opportunities for training, for aspiration in their lives, they can also take good steps forward. And then we have things like council tax, which is quite progressive really. For families that are living in poverty, they spend a tremendous amount of their money on things like that in proportion to those who are maybe more affluent. Across the world, poverty, many countries are going to be suffer more quickly as a result of things like climate change. And I think we have a responsibility as one of those nations who actually contributes quite a lot towards the climate emergency. We have a responsibility to these places to really try and tackle that and be kind of world leaders to try and prevent the poverty that's happening in some of these countries as a result of the climate emergency that's taking place at the moment. And the Labour Party does have pledges to for sort of international development, but it shouldn't just be about aid. I don't think you want to be able to empower people to be able to make their lives better. I could talk about poverty.
In domestic terms, this is a complex issue. The Liberal Democrats, just to list a few policies, the installation of homes would clearly help, and we're concentrating on low-income households. Secondly, in terms of childcare, we're committed to 35 hours a week free from the end of parental leave, 48 weeks in the year until primary school. Like most parties, actually, minimum wage, living wage, all being raised, I think there is a recognition, actually, across the political space that there are issues to be dealt with here. Perhaps a more macro view of this is why is it that our economy is not working for these people? Because personally I believe in the market economy. I'm a capitalist, but I can tell that capitalism isn't working for enough people, and indeed, in answer to the previous question, fed the Brexit vote, I would argue. So there are some bigger issues around how we tax business, how we tax work, how we should tax wealth, the balance between thereof. So in view of I've got some time limits, but I recognise that it isn't just as simple as giving people money, because that actually doesn't change the situation. Most of those people in those circumstances, and I used to work at Beverly Hills Surgery, I know that there are pockets of people, of populations in this area that are well off, are not affluent. They were my patients, and my patients in Slough also fall into this description. But they also are proud people, and they want to work, and they want to provide for their families. So we've got a lot of work to do to make the economy work for them. And just quickly, in terms of globally, this country actually has a pretty good reputation internationally for its international development work, for our 0.7% of GDP, which Liberal Democrats have committed to adhering to. We are doing a lot, but of course we can always do more. It's challenging, population growth, climate change affecting particular areas that are quite poor, but we should do more.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you want to respond to that at all? No? Thank you, Sue. Good question. Right. Question 9 is from Andrew Nickelberg. There we go. Thank you.
What strategy and tactics would you propose to reduce GP waiting times in this constituency?
You're going to be the expert, I'm guessing. Yeah, it comes up a lot when I talk to people. They can't get a GP appointment. And when I went to the urgent care centre at Brandsbridge they said to me, oh, Wokingham, closely followed by Woodley, are the places that most people seem to come from because they can't get a GP appointment, and they were saying it's tremendous strain. I think all of the political parties are looking at investing in GP training places, which is good, and I think we do need that. But surely, it must be more than that. We need to be able to retain existing GPs as well. And steps towards doing that, presumably, must be around things like staff morale. You know, the NHS has been underfunded for such a long time, and I think that the Labour Party's policies of really significantly investing in the health service would go some way to really address that, so that GPs aren't feeling that they've got more and more to do with less and less resources available to them. So to be able to provide a much better place for sort of their mental health, if you want. So to try and retain them to stay. I think it's something like the first time in 50 years we're actually starting to see a decrease, a decline in the number of GPs that are working here, and that really has to stop.
Thank you.
Well, can I take the 50 seconds as well? Because I think this might be a challenge for me. Thank you for the question, Andrew. Yes, this is a real challenge. To produce someone like me as a GP takes about 10 years. And so the idea, these lies the Tories are putting around about increased GPs, you're not going to be able to do it. It's a lie. All right? To get to me is 10 years. Actually, not Brexiting would help, because there are plenty of doctors in Europe who would come here and work as GPs. All right? That's the first thing. If you look at the staffing crisis around nursing places, up to 100,000 vacancies in the middle of next decade, the idea that shutting our doors or actually discouraging people. I met a nurse the other day, Czech, fantastic, looked after my little one who suddenly got her finger caught at the door. She's going home. Why is she going home? She no longer feels welcome. Alright, so the reality is that we are going to cause a massive staffing crisis, not in general practice, but across the health service and social care by doing what we're doing. So let's just not do it. But in terms of a primary care strategy, yes, in my profession, people are tired, they're afraid, they're sort of thinking, I just don't want to do this anymore, there are problems with pensions, and actually disincentivising people to do further work. And the job itself is not an attractive prospect for new medical graduates who are looking at it thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. So as Annette rightly says, it is funding. It's about trying to make the job a job that you want to do and not feel like it's a job that you have to endure. And there is a difference. And you're dealing with, putting myself to one side, you're dealing with successful, bright people who want to have stimulating careers and they're feeling disincentivised. This isn't good for any of us that this is happening. So it's complex. Locally, yes, I've worked at the Urgent Care Centre, and yes, you're right, you tended to be certain areas who tended to, the people used to turn up, and yes, one of them was Wokingham. There is an issue here. We do need more primary care, particularly with all the building that's going on. I have a plan to try to address that, and let me and I will try to implement it.
Thank you very much. Right, question 10 is from Michael Douglas. Michael, where are
you? Much better looking.
Why does the panel think that the incumbent MP has avoided this debate, and this strategy that is also employed by his boss, do we think it's going to work for him?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just, can I defend John Redwood without you shouting at me? This is seemingly an instruction that all Tory candidates are getting. Very few of them are actually doing these events, and you need to reflect upon why that is. And yes, the leadership being shown on ducking the difficult questions is being shown by the Prime Minister. And if you haven't seen Andrew Neil's takedown video, I encourage you to watch it, because actually it says it all. Seriously though, this is our democracy. You know, not everybody in this room agrees on every issue. But our democracy matters. Because however frustrating, irritating, often flawed democracies can be, it's a darn sight better than the alternative. And what I worry about, in my darker moments, is the decline in democracy, the validity of democracy declining, because people won't engage in proper debate, they won't deal with truth. I mean, how about we just actually tell the truth? How about we actually deal with facts, with evidence, not nonsense, not spin? And in the case of Mr. Johnson, he seems incapable of not lying. And this is not in the national interest. It's wrong. And we all have an opportunity to vote against it next week. Because if we don't have a vibrant, trusted democracy, we end up in a much darker place than where we are. It's so important.
I actually thought he might turn up, to be honest. I gather he has formed for this. A few years ago, he turned up on the night, and I thought maybe he'd do that. And to be honest, mostly, it's frustrating for us, because we would like to have a spectrum of views up here to be able to discuss and debate. But also, I'm quite frustrated for everyone else here. You know, you've come out here, you want to hear a cross-section of views, you want to hear from your incumbent MP, and he has made the choice not to turn up. And I think it's, I don't know if it's complacency or arrogance, but it's very, very disappointing. Yeah, equally. Across the spectrum. Across the spectrum, I think it's incredibly frustrating for us and for everyone here that they're not able to be here.
The question was about the incumbent MP.
Something that you do also, what my experience on the doorstep is, sometimes people see the rosettes and they say, oh, I don't like the leader. But when pushed, I say, what do you think about Boris Johnson? What do you think about Joe Swinson? And to be honest, those three major political parties, a lot of people are just quite angry. And for exactly, I think people don't know what to believe anymore. They have this perception that all politicians are just liars and they're going to tell them what they want to hear, give them the numbers that they want to hear for their particular area of interest. And that's really sad, especially for someone like me. I'm quite new to this, and to hear that there's such discontent among society that, with regards to our politicians. And I find it incredibly sad that these people aren't prepared to stand up there and say their piece. You know, these are people in positions of relative power. They should be prepared to stand up and be scrutinised and be challenged by the electorate.
I completely agree with that. I think there is a particular responsibility for the incumbent MP. But I think there's something else going on as well, and that's that any ideas that you have, it's harder to look somebody in the eye and say it. So I look at the evasion as something that means I'm not sure what we're actually telling people is going to stand up to that scrutiny, so that's why we're not here, because it can only go wrong from the stuff that we've said.
To add, really.
Please don't feel the need to. No, good, right. It's because I'm seeing the next question, which is a cracker. So, Peter Wells, where are you?
I'm here. I think both candidates have mentioned that this Brexit thing is one of the key things on the doorstep. But putting that aside, what is the biggest concern after that you find on the doorstep, and what are you going to do in that area?
Good question, sir. Thank you. Annette.
The biggest thing that comes up on the doorstep for me, that I hear people talk about, is the NHS. In my experience, it comes up more than Brexit. More people say to me that they're really worried about what's going to happen. Is the NHS going to be sold off to the Americans if Brexit goes through? I've got a family member who's waiting for cancer treatment and they've had to wait far longer than the guidelines recommend. I can't get a GP appointment, these sorts of things. So the Labour Party is very committed to investing very heavily in the NHS, and which is incredibly important. They're looking at spending a real-term increase of 4.3% over the term, every year over the term of the Parliament. And it's a really important one because it touches all of us. You know, we all use the NHS at some point, whether it's where, you know, we go and we have our children or our GP appointment for, you know, our child is ill, our flu immunisation, the people who are struggling with mental health. It is such an important issue on the doorstep, and it's something that really needs very significant and very heavy investment moving forward.
Albeit only second to Brexit, I can just agree, it is the National Health Service that comes up the most. And it's understandable, isn't it? I mean, we all at some point have a family member who is not well, particularly if they're elderly, and we have an ageing society, and this is increasingly a problem, a challenge for society, for families, for communities to face. Liberal Democrats have committed £1p on extra income tax to put into healthcare. We want to spend, as I said earlier, 11 billion on mental health services. There's undeniably a need for more money in the system. And so people are concerned, and, you know, it isn't. If you look at the demographics of our country, around about 20-22% of people were born between 1945 and 1958. And as a consequence, and our whole system has been propped up essentially by people who work paying tax. So you don't pay tax for when you need the care, you pay the tax for people who need the care now. And the problem we face as a society is it used to be that there were more people in work than in retirement. And unfortunately for us, that is no longer the case. And so that it is really important that actually we have meetings like this going forward outside of elections to discuss that cold, hard reality. I want to live in a society where everybody gets access to the healthcare they need, irrespective of their means. I want people to be able to grow old with respect. I fear if we don't actually start talking about this issue, thinking about the complexities and challenges, that might not be the case in the future. So start voting for people who understand that reality and are prepared to have that debate.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you. It's encouraging to know that you actually listen to people on the doorstep. And I'm hoping that when one of you are elected, you'll continue to do that. Thank you.
Good. Question 12 is from Bruce Robertson. Very festive, sir.
Right. What do you think democracy will look like in 10 years' time? Our current, this is my own view, our current system in Parliament is based on empire.
Okay, so the question was, what do you think democracy will look like in 10 years' time? Are our systems beyond repair?
If you'd have asked me 10 years ago, sir, I would have been quite a passionate defender of first past the post as a form of democracy and representation. I do think constituency-based democracy, people being responsible for an area, is something to protect. But I do look on, particularly in the last couple of years, and I wonder whether first past the post is delivering the moderate, pragmatic, evidence-based government the majority of people seek, be they of one political persuasion or another. We're living at a time now where things have become incredibly polarised, on not just the Brexit issues, in other ways as well. And in my conversation, many conversations I've had on the doorsteps, most people aren't in those areas. Most people are in the middle. But the first past the post system and two major parties in that system, if they both begin to tack away from the centre in different ways, you end up with what we've got now. And so I've become persuaded of the need to look at electoral reform just because of what's happened in the last couple of years. Now, the form of electoral reform and proportional representation, or what they've got in Ireland, which is sort of a hybrid of both, I think that's a discussion for another day. But at the moment, the current system is not serving this country well. And I think if we want our democracy to thrive, which I think all of us in this room, I suspect, do want our democracy, do want it to thrive, I think in 10 years' time, if we haven't had a proper debate about the state of our democracy and the way that it's structured, I worry that it will be in a worse state than it currently is now.
I'm going to find myself agreeing with a lot of what Philip has just said. If you had asked me a few years ago, I would have been a big advocate of first past the post, and I still see its benefits. But I do feel over the last sort of 3 years or so, with everything that's gone on in this country, opinions are, there's a lot of people who are very angry, and there's a lot of people who feel that their voices aren't really represented. And another reason I wasn't necessarily so keen on electoral reform is I lived in a country for a few years where they do have a form of proportional representation. And it was a snapshot of their time that I lived there. But during that period, I don't know how many sort of general elections they had, but it felt like quite a few. And I had a perception at the time that that form of government led to kind of unstable governments. They really struggled to reach consensus moving forwards with regards to how they were going to form a government. But because of everything that's happened, I am slowly coming around to the idea of proportional representation, and I think we need to have some sort of dialogue about it moving forwards. With regards to which system, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know enough about the different systems that are in place to know which would be a direction I would go in, but I do think that we are getting to a point where I would like to see more dialogue about it moving forwards.
You partly answered the question, but everything, and include the Houses of Parliament and the way they're set up, is very confrontational. I've also worked and lived in different countries, and I'm really worried that what we have, there's a complete lack of vision of what it might be in 10 years' time.
Yes, the House of Commons is set up, it's quite sort of, you're facing each other. In other parliaments, it's much less confrontational. I'm not sure how people would like to change that, because it does provide occasionally good theatre, and I wonder whether the British like that privately and secretly. Our political system, though, is about political parties, and if you're successful in being elected there, you'll be walking through the lobby going, at times, being a member of the Labour Party, and boy did I do that as a member of the Conservative Party, up until very recently. Because you're whipped, you're part of a party. But those parties rely upon diverse, large memberships, diversity in views. And if you look, I think the Labour Party's got a larger membership than anyone else, but actually if you looked at a typical group of Labour voters, and then you looked at the Labour membership, and the same applies to all political parties, or the Conservatives, you often find the membership is out of step with the voters. Unless you get back to mass participation, mass membership of political parties, I think you're going to have electoral reform.
The only thing I just wanted to pick up on there is, yeah, the idea of theatre in the House of Commons might be very entertaining when you're watching it on the telly, but I actually find it quite disrespectful. I don't like it.
Right, I'm going to make this next question the last one. Okay, yeah, and I have chosen it. And it's the question from Sarah Billsbury. Sarah? Aha, thank you, over there. This is a good question to finish on, I thought.
Thank you. Would each candidate please outline their local manifesto for Wokingham and also explain how they will fulfil their manifesto promises if elected?
So the things that come up most, so I live here, I hear a lot of the issues and I understand a lot of the things that come up on the doorstep. The things for me that I want to see changing locally are education. I think there needs to be more funding, and I would want to work with sort of the local education community, find out what their needs are, and really push in government for more funding for our schools. Within that umbrella, something that I'm particularly concerned about is children who've got special educational needs. And I think that we have inclusion here, and because of the constraints of funding in schools, too often these children just aren't supported, and that's something so education is something that I feel very, very strongly about. Climate. I would like to, Wokingham Borough has had a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion. They've had this consultation with regards to looking at how they can implement things locally. I would like to see the Wokingham constituency really push hard on climate. I'd like us to be in a position where we can make promises of the houses that are built here to be built in a much more environmentally friendly way, to have sort of insulation, to have solar panels, all those kinds of things. And I would like us to be able to educate people across the constituency so that we have got these big bold changes on a national level, but also we can make changes within our communities here. And housing is a big one. It's come up tonight, and it does come up from people. And I don't personally drive, and over the course of this campaign, I've been out to a lot of different parts across the constituency, and I have appreciated the levels of development in some areas of Shinfield, for example. And so I would like to see. I do want to see building. I'm not going to lie. I want to see council houses and I want to see social housing, but I would like it to be done sort of in sympathy with the area, but also with the input of people from within the area as well, so that we can make sure that the houses that we put up go in the right places with the right infrastructure in place.
Thank you, Sarah. Right, 5 things. 1, on development. Yes, it's quite remarkable as you travel around this constituency how much development is already taking place. There comes a point when you can have too much. I commit to campaign to reduce the national figures, the expectation of this area set by national government, because you get to a point where the infrastructure cannot support anymore, and I'm firmly against Graysley. Secondly, with regards to healthcare provision, I've already mentioned it, I will seek to change legislation so that healthcare provision matches planning, matches the development. We are all entitled around here to decent healthcare, and if we just keep putting more and more houses up without planning our healthcare, that is going to deteriorate, so I want to stop that. And education, commitment on funding of education. This borough is notoriously underfunded relative to the rest of the country. That has to change. We've had the same MP for 32 years. How's it gone for everyone? Yeah, that has to change. Plastics. In my former representative role, I worked with a particular pressure group in Crowthorne around reducing the use of plastics, working with supermarkets. We made some progress. We could have done more. And if I get elected here in Wokingham, I want to make this a plastic-free place. I don't want single-use plastics being used in the way that they are being used. And that means working with business, and I'm determined to do that. And finally, on youth services. Once upon a time, I was Youth Justice Minister. We're quite lucky around here, not that much crime relative to other parts of the country. But there are still issues for young people. There are still temptations, county lines, drugs, gangs. There are 11 county lines into Bracknell. This is a growing problem. These young people need to be given opportunities to do other things. I'm a passionate believer in the power of sport. I've worked with sports clubs across this borough and across the region to provide those opportunities to young people so they don't get sucked into drugs and related crime. And I'm determined to continue that work if elected as the Member of Parliament for Wokingham.
Well, thank you. Oh, you're going to come back, yes? Yeah, please do.
Thank you both for your answers. It's very much appreciated. You both represent parties that may not become the government. And I suppose I'm interested to understand how, even if one of you are elected, how you can influence local policies when you're not necessarily in government.
I think hopefully what comes across is that, I'm very passionate about this area. I live here, my kids go to school here. And I think, even if you're an MP in opposition, you can still fight really hard. You can still have a voice, and you can still push extremely hard for the people in your community and represent their views. So I really think that even if I was elected as an MP and we didn't have a Labour government, we ended up with a Conservative government, I would still be able to fight extremely hard and push really hard for real change in our community.
Locally, the Liberal Democrats are on a trajectory to take over the council. And my expectation is that will happen next May if our canvass returns at the moment are anything to go by. So locally, I, as the Member of Parliament working with the Liberal Democrat-led council, can affect a lot of change in the next 5 years. But you're right, nationally, if God forbid we do have a Tory majority come next Friday, how do you go about changing things? Well, the interesting thing is, a good idea is a good idea. All right? If you go to a minister and you say, look, healthcare is a problem with regards to planning, they'll look at it and realise that it is. And they'll look at all of their marginal seats and think, actually, he's got the point, we need to do that. And I won't be precious about it. I'll make sure that it's publicly known that it's come from me and my party. But you can affect change by making the case, the persuasive case to central government. And I know how to do that.
To thank you for your questions. Thank you everyone. We did have a huge stack of questions, and so it was wonderful to have so many questions to choose from. I hope that you feel we got a good breadth, but thank you to everyone who contributed, and particularly those who have read their questions out. That's wonderful, thank you. So we just have 2 minutes each for a closing statement. I think we will allow Lisa to go first, since you opened second. So please, 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, everyone. Can I just say, in the 10 years that I've been in this game, this has been the most civil and stimulating hustings I've ever participated in. You've asked plenty of interesting questions, you've made some really interesting points, and I'm taking them all away. Can I thank Annette also for participating? And if you're new to this, can I just say, you've been pretty bloody good, because it really... But what I would say, though, is governing is complex. And we are facing significant challenges in this country. Brexit is the least of it. Brexit makes it harder, for sure, in my book. But we're living in an age where the population of the world has doubled in my lifetime. They want a job, they want heat, they want food, they want a home, and they'll move to find it. We have financial contagion problems, we have pandemic problems, we of course have climate change problems. All of these things to face, humanity needs to face it. My own belief is that membership of a supranational organisation makes meeting those challenges easier, however flawed that organisation might be. Which is why I'm now more Remain than I was in 2016. I'd die in a ditch for it, And here in Wokingham, if you give me the chance, I'm going to take that back to Westminster and continue the battle, because this is about the future for our children and our grandchildren, and indeed our great-grandchildren. Make the right decision next week, and you will affect real change and build a brighter future for this country. Thank you very much.
Please excuse me for not standing up again. Politics currently feels quite polarised, as has been mentioned this evening. And there is a lot of anger across the country. And from speaking to people on the doorstep, there are a lot of people, I think, who feel a bit lost in the political wilderness. And it's our responsibility as prospective members of Parliament to really be able to communicate our ideas, our beliefs, our passion, and the policies of the parties that we're here to represent. And today we've had quite a diverse cross-section of questions, so thank you so much for that. I was quite apprehensive about this evening. It's the first time I've done anything like this, and you prepare what you can. Subjects I've prepared for have not come up, but that's fine. But what I do hope is that in all of this, I've been able to convey sort of my passions, my honesty moving forwards. The Labour Party manifesto and their pledges and their beliefs I see as things for optimism and hope for the future. And I think this country right now really needs optimism and hope. And I hope that you'll believe me when I say that if I am elected, I will guarantee I will work incredibly hard for this community, the community where I live, and I hope that I would be able to provide real change in our community. And thank you for coming.
I'm sure you want to join me in thanking our two candidates who have come this evening for answering the questions and for engaging with us and for being here tonight. So thank you. Let's express your... Personal thanks to that. Your self-discipline from both of you has been exemplary. So that has made my job easy, so thank you for that. And it has enabled us to get through a good slate of questions, so thank you. I do want to say thank you tonight to the planning group, particularly to Richard Mammy and to Louise Cole. Thank you for the students that have been helping as well, that's been wonderful. We want to thank Wokingham Baptist Church for hosting and having us here tonight. Thank you to the volunteers on sound and in all sorts of different ways helping us tonight. And thank you all for coming. I think I can close by saying that democracy is a precious thing. It is a precious thing and not to be taken for granted. And so I just close this evening by reminding you that we have 5 candidates standing for to be our MP at the general election. And as just a reminder, they were all invited in tonight, but just encourage you all to vote next Thursday and to encourage others to do so, please. So thank you and good night.